Hi everyone, my name is Peter Drake. I'm the provost at the New York Academy of Art, and we are very fortunate to have two legendary art dealers, Hal Bromm and Michael Findlay, joining us tonight in conversation. They've mentioned already that they'd like this to be as interactive as possible, so if you have questions, don't hesitate to, we don't have to wait 45 minutes to get to them. As soon as you've got a question, I think you're more than willing to ask. But a little background, a downtown pioneer, Hal Bromm established TriBeCa's first contemporary gallery in 1975, followed by an East Village branch in 1984. Since its establishment, Hal Bromm Gallery has organized historically significant exhibitions in New York City and beyond. For 5 decades, Hal Bromm's rich history of collaborating with artists, galleries, museums, and institutions on the development and curating of avant-garde exhibitions has provided meaningful context around storied moments in the contemporary art world. Michael Findlay is an art dealer and author residing in New York City. Findlay is director of Aquavella Galleries, which specializes in Impressionist and modern European works of art, as well as post-war American painting and sculpture. Findlay is also the author of 3 books, The Value of Art, Money, Power, Beauty from 2012, Seeing Slowly, Looking at Modern Art from 2017, and Portrait of the Art Dealer as a Young Man, 2024. Please welcome Hal and Michael.
Well, it's nice to see such a crowd on a rainy night.
Glad you're all here. Michael and I thought, rather than rambling on for 30 or 40 minutes, which might or might not be amusing, that it would be nice to have your thoughts about what you'd like to hear us talk about. I mean, we've both been at the art business for a long time, and so we go back many, many years.
Well, I would just say that I guess I would say, yes, I was a pioneer, but I was only a brief flash in the pan in SoHo from 67 through 77. And Hal had already taken the reins by then, and I exited SoHo in 77, believing it had become too commercial. Some of you may or may not know there were stickers up, "Soho sucks, bring back the trucks," and that was 77. So I thought at that time, mistakenly, that Nolito was going to be the new Soho. Little did I know that in the other direction, Hal was establishing TriBeCa. So I had a gallery, Feigen, downtown on Green Street from 60, well, it was a storage kind of sale area in 67, exhibitions in 68, and then I took it over myself under the name Duffy & Sons, and I moved to 157 Spring Street, which was on the corner of Spring and West Broadway, in a building that also had René Bloch, the German dealer, also had Max Protech from Washington, and our foundation and a great source of clients was Jaap Rietman's Art Bookstore, which was a legendary bookstore on the corner on the street level. Anyway, that was, and I scurried back uptown, not exactly with my tail between my legs, but Hal took over downtown. He became the emperor dealer of TriBeCa.
How many of you ever knew Jaap Rietman, the bookstore?
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that wasn't that a great place? Yeah, it really was. But Michael, you've left out the purchase offer on that building at 157.
Well, 157 Spring Street, it was, I found one as I found it. It's possible that somebody like, we were discussing the other day at breakfast, that British artist, names going.
Oh,
Any-
what? Damien.
No. Anyway, he was doing. I didn't know. I didn't know he was an artist until 50 years later when I walked into somebody's home on the Upper East Side. I thought he just did construction and he loved soccer. Somebody told me about this building, and it was 6 stories on the corner of Spring and West Broadway, and it was for sale for $40,000 because that's what the owner owed in back taxes. And I had an evil client who lived on Park Avenue who needed a love nest, and I persuaded him to buy the building, and he took the 6th floor. I didn't mention it. He took the 6th floor as his home away from his wife's home, so to speak. I didn't see much of him actually, and he came to. Well, the problem was that, flash forward, he came to a sticky end with a needle in his arm in a trailer park in New Jersey, which is quite far from Park Avenue, and the building was sold, I would say, out from under us. We were tenants paying relatively low rents, and it was turned into. We were offered to buy. We could buy our floors for $50,000 each, which was an astonishing.
That was a lot of money back then.
They probably were 20,000. I didn't know anything about business. I mean, that's a given in my career. Nothing about business. I know how to borrow money. I can spend it. I can buy something for less and try to sell it for more. That's about all I know as a dealer, as a principal. So, and the building was co-opted immediately. It became filled with yuppies, and the galleries were out by 1978. So that was kind of if SoHo began with the late 50s, maybe with artists living there, not as with dealers, with maybe some Japanese artists. Yoko Ono, I think, one of them in the late 50s. There were Japanese artists, and the gallery I was working for, Feigen, we had artists who were living illegally in lofts in SoHo, and then Feigen bought a couple of buildings. Actually, he didn't realize at the time that one of them was going to become a gallery. But anyway, that's sort of how it happened. But how you take it from there, because TriBeCa, you were the kind of the builder of TriBeCa.
Well, that's very kind. I don't know about that, but I had been looking for a loft, and Rosemary Castoro, who was at Spring Street, said, "Well, there are lots of spaces to available." So I looked at space in SoHo, but then a friend said, "Come look at this building on Beach Street," and it was a 6-story building that was a former cheese warehouse, because everything south of Canal on the west side was, of course, part of New York's food market. The New York City food market, like Les Halles in Paris or Covent Garden in London, was part of the city fabric. But at the end of the 60s, the city moved the food market up to Hunts Point in the Bronx, and suddenly this big swath between West Broadway and Greenwich Street over to the Hudson River was filled with nearly vacant buildings and a lot of building owners who didn't know what to do with them. And so what began in SoHo in terms of artists coming in to a neighborhood that no one cared about, except Margot Gale, who was the preservation leader who really saved SoHo in terms of leading the fight because of the cast iron architecture, and she was the leading proponent for cast iron architecture being important. So Margot deserves a big shout out for that. But the artists, of course, saved SoHo in terms of moving into spaces that no one wanted, and that simply continued in TriBeCa, what was to become TriBeCa. Back then, it had no name. We used the old name, which was the Washington Market. And then later, the City Planning Commission created a map, which was basically a trapezoid, not really a triangle, but they called it the Triangle Below Canal, and that became TriBeCa. So suddenly there was this new name. None of us who were pioneers, and I'm talking about people who moved in beginning of the 70s to the neighborhood, particularly were in love with the name TriBeCa, but there it is. The tragedy, of course, is that none of us were smart enough to trademark it, and now look at what's become of that name. I mean, everybody. Yes, Michael.
Had you not started out in Brooklyn?
When I was at Pratt, I was in Brooklyn, yeah, but that.
Why did you leave there and come to TriBeCa?
What?
Why did you leave Brooklyn and come to TriBeCa?
Well, I was working for a big architectural firm on East 59th Street, and the commute from downtown to 59th was easier than taking 3 trains from the Pratt neighborhood, which I loved, by the way. I mean, Clinton Hill and Fort Greene, wonderful neighborhoods, even back when I was at Pratt. And of course, today they're extraordinarily beautiful, and a lot of restoration and gentrification, like so many areas. But that was the reason. And now that we've talked about real estate, what do you want to know about art? Peter.
Curious, Michael, you've written quite a bit, and have you always thought of yourself as a writer?
He's a very good writer. If you haven't read his books, I recommend them.
I came to New York for 2 weeks with $200, and I didn't think I was going to make a living as a poet. But I was amazed to find out that for nothing I could go and sit at the actually rather dirty feet of Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky and others, poets at the time. And also for $1 I could spend the evening at the 5 Spot listening to Charlie Mingus. So I was writing a lot of poetry, some of it better than others, none of it terribly good. I discovered actually some years later that mine was remarkably similar to, at the same time, but not quite as good as Carl Andre's. Sorry to mention that name in these hallowed halls. Yes, my father was a sporting journalist and my brother was a journalist, so the act of writing is not difficult for me. And every once in a while, COVID was a help because I could devote more time to it. But I have enjoyed writing, and I guess my first time out, I don't know if anybody will remember the name Alvin Demick, who was the editor of an art magazine, which was not quite art news in the day, but it was a art magazine. And if you took out a half-page ad for your artist, you got an article about your artist, which I was happy to write, even though I was representing the artist. So you could say those were the bad old days, but they were pretty innocent anyway. So yeah, I enjoy writing. Yeah, but it's not. I wouldn't. Well, I wouldn't do it for a living. I have to say that. I'm sorry. It's not has no pecuniary interest for me. Yes.
So speaking of making a living, the monetary rewards for selling art weren't what they are today. You were an architect, and Michael, you have all these other interests. What were you modeling the idea of selling art on? What were you hoping to achieve by jumping into a living?
3 meals a day, hot meals, 3 hot meals a day.
Are you asking what sort of business plan we might have had before we?
I suppose it's a crazy decision to make back then. So.
Yeah. Well, as some people in this audience know, I had a wonderful opportunity to run a small design office in London for a couple of years. And when I got to London, I contacted David Hockney, who I knew through Henry Geldzeller here in New York. And I said, look, I'm going to be in London at least a year. I'd love to meet some artists. You're the only artist I know. And he introduced me to Derek Jarman, the young filmmaker. And Derek had a circle of brilliant artists who were really terrific people. And we all became friends. And by the time I came back to New York, I said, why don't you all give me a small work of art that I can take back, and I'll hang it up in my loft at Beach Street and give you an exhibition. I don't know where that idea came from, but it did happen that way, and they all said, great, we'll give you a piece. And so that was the first show at Beach Street, which we called New London in New York. And I think people in New York were very curious because, first of all, 10 Beach Street was totally off the radar in 1975. A lot of people north of Canal Street had no idea where that was. I remember one friend on the Upper East Side said, how do I get to Beach Street? And I said, it's one block below Canal. And I could hear the empty space because Canal was pretty unknown to this person as well. But there it was. And I think curiosity brought people down to what was to become TriBeCa in those days. And then a friend who was in real estate said, well, you should have a gallery. And I said, I don't know. And yeah, I'm going to find you a space. And then the next thing I knew was I was signing a lease for a space on Franklin Street. And that was right next door to Martha Wilson and Willoughby Sharp, who had Franklin Furnace. And we were basically the only people in the neighborhood. Koki, you had a question?
Yeah, mine is really, it's a general question. The gallery since the 50s, they were located on 57th Street and Madison. Then they moved to SoHo, then to move to the East Village, and then they moved to Jackson. Now they're moving back to TriBeCa. What is the trend? Why this gallery is so moving almost every 10 years? That's first question. The following question is, since we all kind of cherish the time, the 70s art scene in New York, could that ever be repeated again? I mean, is there any room to repeat it from the kind of the good time that we all remember? So this for both of the persons.
You take the first, and I'll take the second.
Okay. Well, Michael's already said that he had a space in SoHo, but felt that the scene was shifting to Nolita. Down at Beach Street, I had the feeling that what had started in SoHo was going to continue moving south. And indeed, a lot of artists did move into what became TriBeCa. I remember Alice Adams and her husband Bill Gordy rented a loft with a bunch of other artists very near Beach Street and ended up having a terrible time because they had a landlord who was very avaricious and mean and nasty. And as the neighborhood grew in popularity and more people were coming into the neighborhood, this particular guy would turn off their water. And then the next day he would turn off the gas. And then a week later he'd turn off the heat because he was trying to force them out of the building because he realized he could sell the building to someone who would co-op it and turn it into a renovated residential loft building. And Alice and Bill and their fellow residents fought. They had a rent strike. They put all the money in escrow. And I remember saying, Alice, you're gonna be losing this. This guy, he's gonna kill you. You all should take your escrow money and buy a you could buy a building a block away with your escrow money, and you'd all own it, and you'd be homeowners. And they said, no, we're gonna win in court. We're fighting this. Well, guess what? They didn't win in court. Their money all went to the landlord, and they were out. So watching that was very painful. And I encouraged artists who I was working with, wherever you are in the city, dig in. Don't just be a renter forever, because it's not going to go anywhere. And we were talking last week about the fact, where is the city today in supporting young artists of any ilk? I mean, dancers, musicians, actors, artists, sculptors, photographers. Where is the city in terms of supporting young talent like we all remember, people who come to the city to make it? They need to be supported, because this is the lifeblood of a city like New York. People come here because there's opportunity, but they need to be supported. And so Michael and I had a big discussion about, we have a new mayor. Maybe the new mayor is going to take a different point of view about supporting young creative talents in New York City. But I'll let Michael go to part two of
I think the irony is that at the top of the pile, the arts are pretty much managed financially by the same people who have the greatest real estate interests in Manhattan. Collectors, I won't mention their names, or else I might as well retire tomorrow. But
some of you have heard of Harry Macklowe.
when this is a while ago, a group of art dealers, and we were a disparate group. We were not all from one genre or another, uptown, downtown, gathered to be asked by the then, I think it was de Blasio's regime, what can we do for the arts? And everybody, without having discussed it, said, cheap housing for artists. That is essential. And in fact, some of us pointed out, had a map, and showed Tom Freudenheim, was that his name? Anyway, I'm sorry. They showed where the city had empty spaces, on this island, in that place down. And we were told quite bluntly that anything to do with the real estate was off the table, and that issues of tax, of being able, as soon as we put people in there, our taxes will go up. In other words, keeping places empty that young artists of all types could use was beneficial to the real estate interests. I don't know if I'm saying that too simplistically, but I believe that there can be no eventual Roy Lichtenstein selling for $165 million by Aggie Gund unless there was once a very cheap loft for a Roy Lichtenstein, 40 years old, not young, to come from Rutgers to paint that painting and sell it for $1,200. And if that can't, that's a cycle. It's I don't know, it's a kind of an organic cycle, cultural cycle. But if it's not seeded, and it can only be seeded by having any kind of cheap, grubby, big space for a dancer or a painter. I don't know, and we don't have it. So I don't think New York is going to grow culturally. It's going to be it's a market. It's a bourse now, pretty much.
Yeah, if you think back to when Jasper Johns or Bob Rauschenberg or artists of that moment were living in cold water lofts over in the Seaport neighborhood.
Coenty Slip,
and other artists who were pioneering in SoHo. I mean, Rosemary Castoro and Carl Andre and their peers, Sal LeWitt, Donald Judd. They were all pioneers in a neighborhood that no one wanted to live in. This is a pattern that we've seen, but where are those neighborhoods today? There's no opportunity in SoHo or TriBeCa or the Seaport. I don't know. What about Red Hook, where there's no transportation? I don't know, but this is a reality that we can look back and remember how artists gained a foothold because there was somewhere affordable to live and work, to have a studio.
And adjacent to being adjacent, having galleries, even if they're on 57th Street. In Manhattan, the same island to go and visit a gallery, but when I was on Green Street and Spring Street, if an artist wanted me to visit, I could be there the next morning for an hour, and I'd walk to studios to make studio visits, and that was good for me and good for them.
Well, now that we're all depressed, what's next?
Yeah.
A revolution.
A new mayor
A new mayor
who
doesn't belong, not owned by the real estate.
not yet.
Yeah.
A new mayor who we could all be lobbying. I have a foothold in the world of historic preservation, and from that point of view, we're lobbying the new mayor to understand that the whole myth of affordable housing created by the REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, is indeed a myth because REBNY has successfully convinced the public that preserving historic neighborhoods is anathema to housing opportunity. In fact, it's the reverse. When you save a historic neighborhood that people have lived in for decades and decades, and you preserve that housing, you're saving not just a neighborhood, but you're saving a whole community and a way of life. And REBNY has fought against this, saying, no, we have to build luxury towers, and we'll give a little portion of that tower to affordable housing. And guess what? When the tower gets built, it's all a myth and there isn't any affordable housing. I mean, we've seen this for years and years and years. So lobbying the new mayor, maybe that's what's next.
Hal, a question for you. You mentioned that David Hockney was essential to introducing you to London artists. Did you, when you moved back to New York, find a similar New York artist who was helping you introduce you to artists that you didn't know?
Well, I already had a lot of good friends who were artists here. And when I came back, of course, I rekindled friendships with them. I mean, Suzanne Harris, Lucio Pozzi, Rosemarie Castoro, Susanna Tanger, Jean Heistein, Richard Nonis, Jody Pinto, Alice Adams, people I had started working with in the early years of the gallery were really people I got to know before I ever had a gallery, just because I was always involved with art and wanting to spend time with artists. So,
I just wanted to throw in there that a lot of artists who I showed early days in SoHo, I met through other artists who would say to me, for instance, Jim Rosenquist said, there's a guy working in my studio, his name is Chuck Hinman, he's doing these shaped canvases. He is far too shy to ever come and ask you, would you go and look at his work? And that was, and that happened. The only artist I took, I think, off the street was John Baldessari, because his work was so funny, I couldn't stop laughing. But other than that, it was artists telling me about artists, and I'm sure that.
yeah, I mean, Richard Nonis introduced me to Jody Pinto as one example. But there are also collectors who introduce you to artists, which might strike you as odd, but it's pretty wonderful when that happens. I mean, most recently in the last few years, collectors in Pennsylvania introduced me to Joey Tepedino. I didn't know who Joey Tepedino was, never heard of him. But they said, oh, we bought a painting by this guy, and you might like it. And they sent me this image, and it was dynamite. And I shared it with Katie, who's with us tonight, and Nicole, who were guest curating a summer group show, and their group show was all about how are artists dealing with the pandemic. You know, what's their reaction? Are they not working? Are they working in a new direction? And I said, here's a guy who seems to be doing something in a new direction. What do you think? And they put him in the show, and people bought both works immediately. A collector who lived in Richard Nonis's building, Edward Albee, was always introducing me to artists. Sometimes I didn't like their work, it didn't strike a chord, but that's okay. You know, the idea that there was this dynamic was great. Michael, you had a question.
Oh, I was just going to comment that, the mayor, at the last minute, came out for all of those ballot initiatives that supposedly are supposed to foster low-income housing. And that seems so cynical and unfortunate to me, because I worry that he is going to be one of these people like de Blasio, who say that preservation is elitist, and who don't appreciate that the greatest store of affordable housing that we have in New York are all of those 6-story new law tenement buildings built after the new tenement law in 1900 that are all rent regulated. And that there's nothing that the real estate industry likes more than to acquire those buildings and to demolish them, and that the so-called affordability that they offer in exchange for these buildings which have real affordability is laughable.
Yeah.
But we still must make the effort.
We must be
thoughtful.
Yes.
How do y'all think the relationships between like these art spaces and the communities around them have changed? So like not just with collectors and artists, but just the general community sort of surrounding these galleries.
Well, I didn't know an art lawyer for the first 20 years of my life as a dealer. Now, I think I speak to lawyers more often than I do artists or even collectors. So there were, I think, Hal, correct me if I'm wrong, there was the artist, the dealer, the collector, the curator, and the critic. That was the community. Now, you don't have the critic anymore. I mean, they're not. I mean, there's no Clement Greenberg to, Saint Clement Greenberg to anoint artists. You have art lawyers, art bankers, art advisors. You have industries that have been created around our business that are adjuncts, or are they piranhas? I don't know, but it's to me it's actually mind-boggling when I step back and think of that.
Well, we're tipping into the whole subject of how art has become a commodity. So in the 70s, people bought art because they liked it. And Michael and I have had long chats about this, the idea that we both remember collectors who would come in and fall in love with a work of art, and they had to have that work of art. They had to go home with that painting or that drawing or that sculpture. It was just something that spoke to them, and that was it. They were in love. And today, we still have a few people like that, but so many more people who come in to the art gallery scene or the art fair scene, which is another topic completely. They want to know what's hot, what's in, what should we buy? Or they're arm in arm with an art advisor who's going to tell them what's in or what's hot and what they should buy. So there's a big difference here. And then, of course, there are the people who buy really valuable works of art and put those works of art into warehouses in a duty-free zone somewhere and wait for them to go up in value even higher and then flip them because it's part of their asset portfolio. And this is a whole new world compared to what we all knew in the 70s and early 80s.
Yeah, a collector would come in and say, what have you got what have you got that I might like? And don't tell me the price. I want to, you know, I wanted to say something to me. Now, the consultant calls up or emails or texts with a description of a particular work that they feel their client must buy. It's a red mark Grosjean 60 inches square for under $10 million. And I have been perhaps rather rude to say we're not a deli. You know, we don't make to order. We don't produce art to order. But those people are not embarrassed to be in an art market. They're not in the art world. They're not in the art scene. They are definitely in the art market, and that describes their entire approach. And they might buy a painting and spend a lot of money on it, and they might eventually, some down the line, sell it for even less, but somehow they have managed to extract financial gain out of borrowing against that or leveraging it, because there are banks out there that I was astonished to find out that lend billions of dollars against art. That's an awful lot of art.
And now you can buy a fractional interest in an important work of art. If
You can't get it out. You can't get your money out. But
Maybe
you can
not.
put it in.
We have a few art dealers in the audience. Are we? What do you all think about this phenomenon? Gwendolyn? No.
I have no thoughts.
No.
Sorry.
Leslie?
I think it's pretty awful, actually. I definitely have thoughts. I'm a very opinionated person, and my opinion is that it's very sad that people would think that they, are actually getting something for a $20, investment of a tiny little piece of art that has no, aesthetic or spiritual or, cultural elevation in their lives. I mean, this is not why we do what we do. And I think, I was appalled when I read that article in the Times. When was it? Last week, about that company, which I wasn't aware of. I don't know if you, Michael and Hal, have had any.
That's the top of the iceberg. I mean, that it's much worse. It's worse than that, because I think it's appealing to people that art is only monetary value, instead of urging somebody who can't afford to buy a Monet to go to the Met, and actually they don't have to pay anything if they're smart, could spend a day looking at some wonderful, wonderful paintings and in a sense owning them on a personal level and seeing them. They're told that for their $7,000 they own, I don't know, 1/1000th in a painting they've never seen. In fact, they don't even know if it exists, right? It's in a warehouse. That they'll never get their money out, because what is not factored in is that when that company buys the work, they pay somebody to buy it, a me or a Hal. They don't do it themselves, and they have to pay somebody to sell it. That's money in, money out. They have to pay to insure it, right? And they have to pay to maintain it, and then they want their 20%. In order for that to actually make the kind of profit that is promised, well, art has no kind of art has ever appreciated that much, and it won't. It's a scam. It's a scam which is unfortunately geared to people's idea that great art is expensive, okay, but that if it's expensive, it's great art. I don't believe that. I don't believe you make something great by putting a price. As a dealer, right?
Actually, in my limited experience, I have found that, for example, I've had various works of art on consignment on the secondary market at very reasonable prices, and I'm not able to sell the work until I raise the price about 100%. So as the price goes up and up and up, I can finally find someone who actually buys.
People pay attention. right? It's crazy. But
Pay
no, but
attention
it's true.
Pay attention to the bigger number.
They pay attention to the number. Well, I think the whole
Well,
our culture's monetized. I don't think it's art, just art. Everything is. I mean,
Well, it goes back. I mean, I remember Jeffrey Deitch came to my loft at West Broadway and did a talk about his new job. And his new job was at the Citibank Art
That's right.
Investment Advisory Service.
yeah.
And that was the beginning of the idea that art could be an investment vehicle. Art could be part of your portfolio. And that was the late 70s, early 80s.
I remember Jeffrey at that time.
Yeah,
And Citibank had an art advisory service.
yeah.
But the art advisory service was also a vehicle for Citibank to reach out to wealthy collectors because they would offer the advisory. I had a client at that time call me up and say, why should I pay $25,000 to Citibank for them to advise me? I said, you don't need to because you are already collecting major pictures and you know what you're doing. And he said, well, why are they doing that? I said, because they want you to put your family and company's money in their bank. It's a kind of a what do you call it?
Ploy. A ploy.
It's a ploy.
Agree.
And if you thought you were depressed earlier, how do you feel now? Michael.
Well, I'd like to undepress us a little bit because as an historian, I would suggest that we're just kind of being like old people here and making things so much worse than they are. That there's always been this commercial aspect to the world of art. You have only to look at popes and cardinals collecting art in the 17th century, or more recently, if you look at Sargent paintings, and there he was churning them out, and people loved them, and the price went up and up and up. He got tired of them, and then he discovered that he could sell them charcoal sketches instead, and they would still pay a great price.
John Singer Sargent.
Yes.
Yes.
100 years ago, if one bought a Lawrence ancestor portrait of somebody, you might pay several $100,000. And today, that same painting won't cost you all that much more because of the way fashion and art has changed. And when you look at that compared to a Basquiat, you say, oh. But the Lawrence was the Basquiat of 100 years ago. And if I had the money that would be required to buy a Basquiat, there are far more wonderful things that I would think to spend all that money on.
Like?
Huh? Sorry.
Going back. Yeah.
How do you believe the relationship between galleries and emerging artists has changed over time?
I'm not sure that it's changed that much. How do you think it's changed?
I haven't found out yet. I'm still emerging.
You don't have the experience to know how it was 20 or 30 years ago because you're too young, but I remember being in the grocery store and sort of bending down to look at tinned tuna fish, and there was a voice behind me, and this voice said, "Are you looking at slides?" And without turning around, I said, "No, I'm looking at tuna fish." But of course, back then, the currency was to go to the gallery and drop off your slides. And if you didn't do that, if you lived far away, you could mail a package of slides into the gallery and hope that someone would look at them. And of course, the more that a gallery was receptive to this influx of slides, the more slides would arrive, because one artist would tell another, oh, if you send your slides to Castelli, they're going to look at them and they'll send you a note or whatever. So we had to develop, and I remember colleagues, did the same thing. If you're sending in slides, you have to have a self-addressed stamped envelope so we can return them. Otherwise, we can't guarantee you'll ever get them back, blah, blah, blah. But today it's all digital. So we get emails. I mean, my gallery gets emails that, say, please look at my work. There's a JPEG attached or something. But just the other day, Gary was telling me that somebody came in and dropped off a big package. And Gary said, well, wait a minute, who are you? What is this? It just said, this is for Hal. And the man ran out the door, said, I have to go. And this was an artist trying to get us to look at the work. And I thought, well, what a strange behavior. If you're going to go to the trouble to come in with a package and say, won't you please look at my work, be a little more open and polite about it instead of saying, I've got to go and running out the door. So what's changed? What's changed is the slides are gone and it's now digital, but it's the same process. And I think a lot of younger galleries probably end up discovering interesting artists because artists will come by and leave something or send in some images. If you're a well-established gallery, chances are you've got a lot of artists you're already dealing with. And how many artists can you deal with, or do you want to deal with, and be successful at it? So we try to discourage that now. But I'm an old guy. I mean, I've had a gallery for 50 years. So am I still open to new work? Absolutely. I mean, Joey Tepedino, this collector, sent an email and said, what do you think of this painting? It's a great painting from what I can see. I mean, I'm looking at a JPEG. But, in the pandemic, we all had to shift to digital, and that was a big change. I'm shifting topics here, but what was interesting is that now we sell art to people who haven't seen it. They see what we post on our website. We have installation shots, we have, whatever. People see that and they respond to it, and every now and then somebody buys something that they've never seen. I think that's fascinating. So that's a big change.
Yeah, I would also say that some of those people who have purchased sight unseen, they own that work digitally. So when they share it with other people, it's not because they come to dinner and they have it hanging on the wall. It's because they're out in a noisy restaurant and they say, I just bought this, Oh, I can't find it. No, it's this. I bought this from Hal Bromm, and I only paid X, and it's better than yours. So it exists. That the physical object is almost beside the point eventually, because it exists as a pixelated image, probably sharper and with more dramatic color than the original. But it doesn't matter because nobody's going to see it. It's only going to be passed around on a phone.
I just want to add some questions. It was a time MoMA rented art to other collectors or
The art lending service.
Right.
Yes.
That was a
concept.
I was very familiar with that.
As a concept, don't you continue doing it? Since the prices are so high, why not continue that knowledge so everybody can have a painting hang in the reading room, whatever, for a small fee? If they love it, they buy it. If not, they'll
Well, it worked in those days.
why not continue that philosophy of dealers who would allow other people to come and rent from them artwork?
But because if you rent it, it means you actually want to look at it for a period of time. But no, it's a market, so you want to own. There's no point.
There's lots of artwork.
As you were saying, you want to own. You don't want to rent.
There's a drawers full of art in every artist's studio and in galleries. nobody see or nobody.
Well, Koki, I think if MoMA or the Whitney or some other institution said we're going to reestablish and bring this idea back of the art lending service, I think that would be interesting. And so I remember working with MoMA when they had that.
We
And
both
it was very, very good.
We would have
But-
small framed works, Schwitters
Yeah.
or Ray Johnson or whatever, and we'd give them for a year, and
Yeah.
they would rent it out. And
So why not galleries can do this as well without the museum with the budget?
the borrower could buy it at the end of the year.
Have to just pay fee.
Well, we'll put
So
that.
artists can make some money, the gallery makes some money.
I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah, we'll consider that. The young lady with the cap, you had a.
Yes, I've heard that a collector might be as interested in the artist as much as their work, bearing in mind that there's not affordable housing in New York. Might collectors and dealers look further afield for work and artists that they might be interested in?
You didn't really
Say the last part again.
Might dealers and collectors in New York be as interested in artists outside of New York,
Oh,
as bearing in mind there is not enough affordable housing?
I think so, yes, sure. I think so. I've introduced Joey Tepedino's work to collectors here he lives in Pennsylvania, and they've wanted to know, is he coming to the city? I'd like to meet him, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but I think collector, over my many years, I've known many collectors who love meeting the artists. They like to invite artists to dinner. They like to go to the studio. They want to get to know what's behind their creative process. You know, what do they think? All of that is fascinating to some collectors. But again, the people I'm remembering are people who fall into that category, who Michael and I talked about earlier, who love art and are buying art because they love it and they want to live with it. So I don't know, are there less people like that today? I'm not sure.
yeah, I think that, well, we could talk about Hub and Dorothy Vogel, for instance.
Yeah.
You know,
Or Milton and Helen Brutton.
yeah, the people who actually had very limited means, but who had huge appetite and amazing energy, ability to corner an artist at their opening and in front of the dealer demand that the artist give them something. But, you know, anyway.
Yeah. Andy?
Who are a few dealers you've admired over the years, and why? What kind of knowledge do you have?
I always admired Paula Cooper. I think she's terrific. Leo Castelli. Leo once said to me, you have to remember in this business, and this is a man who was a banker who became an art dealer, but he said, just remember, fide e fiducia, trust and faith. And of course, in his time, that was the lingua franca of the art business. I mean, if you made a deal with somebody over the phone, it was trust, and you didn't need a paper signed. You had that was it. And
People would walk out of a gallery with a painting, and then a week later they'd get an invoice, which was a simple invoice, and then they'd pay it, and there would be no legal language. There would be a handshake. Dealers bought works with each other on a handshake. There was an amazing amount of trust. So I would,
right.
I would say Leo also.
Unfortunately, a dealer who I won't name, who's now has a worldwide enterprise, came to the gallery in the 80s and bought a Rick Prohl painting from our show, thereby meaning that no one else could buy it because we put a sticker on it and we sent an invoice. And many months later, never paid for it. Of course, the painting was never delivered. And I thought, gee, I guess you never met Leo Castelli. That was sad to me. And now that dealer has a worldwide enterprise, and that kind of bad behavior is still part of that persona.
But God forbid anybody would do it to him now. Would do that to him.
Yeah. But Paula Cooper was funny. I remember before I had the gallery, knowing her, and I said, well, this friend has got a gallery space and I'm going to rent it. And she said, well, just don't expect to make any money. And for the beginning period, that, stuck with me, and, but fortunately you get past that point.
I would add Dick Bellamy to that. He's probably a name that is
Oh yeah, Dick was
beginning, sadly, to be lost to history, but he had the Green Gallery. He was backed by Bob Scull, who pretty much got it, I think, has a bad rap, but he was a great collector.
Yeah.
And a wonderful eye and a generosity of spirit that's amazing. Yeah.
Oil and Steel Gallery.
Oil and Steel, yeah.
Which was on Chambers Street.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, any other questions?
What advice would you give to an emerging artist now? And what would it be different from the advice you would have given them 30 years ago?
You mean in terms of their career?
Trying
Okay.
to get on, or trying to find a gallery, or any of that.
Yeah, there's representation or visibility.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be the nonprofits were an important sort of step into the art world. I'm not sure that that's the case.
White columns or artist space, or yeah. I think the nonprofit spaces are still important. On Drawing Center, fantastic institution. Here we are at the New York Academy. But my advice hasn't changed. I remember complaining to Gene Siegel, who was at SVA, at a dinner party back in the early 80s, that too many artists would approach the gallery from the point of view of thinking that, they're hot stuff and they're going to be a big superstar, and we should immediately sign them up and go to work for them. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what I mean is that you're not teaching people at SVA or at any other institution probably, you're not teaching artists that when they walk out the door with a fine arts degree, that they're not suddenly going to be, the next Leonardo da Vinci. You got to teach young people that there's a practical side to their career. If they're going to show a dealer images, they have to be the best examples of their work that they can come up with. I mean, we would get packages of slides, and out of 30 slides, there would be two things that were worth looking at. And, that's just called editing. And so Gene said, okay, I want you to teach a course at SVA about art as business. And I said, okay, I'll do it for a year. We'll see how it goes. And I would coach artists to think about, how do you put your best foot forward? How do you edit your work? And they would say, well, who should I show my work to? I said, show your work to everybody you know, including your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle, your roommate, before you show it to a gallery. And say to those people, tell me what you really think. Is this anything interesting, or am I wasting my time? Be really crucially, dangerously honest with yourself. And when you get good reactions from your intimate circle, then go commercial, go to a gallery and show them 2 or 3 slides of your most fantastic work. And until then, don't waste their time, don't waste your time. I would say the same thing today.
I would add to that a wrinkle, because I am often now, in my later years, approached by an older generation of artists who may have had, at one point in their career, some degree of success. They've managed to continue, but they feel, I'm being forgotten, I do good work, my gallery closed 50 years ago or whatever. And I say to them, get a website. Oh, I don't know how, I can't be bothered. But I try to insist or tell them to find a young person. And with a website, they can put out their history and their work. But otherwise, I can't send somebody to a studio of a friend of mine that I've known has done great paintings for a long time, just on my say-so. But there are very, very good artists out there who I just say they're still alive, they're still painting, they don't have galleries. And
they're often called mid-career.
Yeah, I guess that's a good.
Somebody in the back, yes, you have.
Why do you like art so much?
That's a really good question. I guess you either accept that it's just part of your psyche, and you don't question it. I mean, I've never questioned it. I like art. I like great architecture, which I consider to be art. I like great theater. I like great films. I think, dance, theater, sculpture, architecture, design, it's all part of art. And I think if you are someone who looks at things carefully and you absorb what you're looking at, you develop a vocabulary that tells you what works and what doesn't. Sometimes people at the gallery will say, I really like that painting. I want my wife to see it, or something like that. And that's fine. I think, you should have that comfort that if you're a couple that you both like it. But the other thing is that go home and think about something else. And if a week later you're still, that memory of that sculpture or that painting is still in your mind, go back and look at it again. I mean, Edward Albee once said that he thought people should look at things more than once. In that instance, he was talking about theater, but he also meant sculpture, painting, photography, anything that you liked. Don't look at it once and then not look at it again. Go back and keep looking at it and develop an understanding of why you do or don't like it. Hockney said quite recently in London that he was dismayed by the fact that so many people who were art tourists, let's say going to look at the Mona Lisa or going to look at whatever on that level, weren't really looking at it. They were holding their camera and their phone was looking at it, but they weren't looking at it. They were just recording what their phone was looking at. And I thought, what a brilliant observation. How people today, more than ever, because of that wonderful device that we all have, the cell phone, aren't really looking. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I would add to that a great work of art, and I don't necessarily mean an expensive work of art, delivers every time you look at it. every time you experience it. And Duchamp said, work of art doesn't exist until it's experienced, until you're half of it. So in my lifetime, there are two, well, I can think of a number, but the Isenheim Walter piece in Colmar and the Rothko Chapel in Houston, I have visited decades apart when I was tender and youthful, reduced to tears, and when I was old and bald, reduced to tears, delivering the same experience that was ineffable. I can't tell you how or why. And they go to the Frick, and I look at a couple of those paintings. I've looked at them probably once a year for 50 years, and still the same thing. And I'm not all the way there yet. I'm not there yet. That art is amazing that it can do that. Amazing. And it could be anything. It could be a Jasper Johns, it could be a Duchamp. It could be I don't know. But you choose it. It chooses you. It should choose you, I think, as a collector.
This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.